Hello, imaginary friends. Welcome to the underground.
We've been denounced. The words echoed in Aurélie's ears as she scrambled into her greatcoat. She could just see Papa's hunched figure as he hurried about in the dark. Maman was helping Eloise and Jules into their coats while comforting them. Aurélie felt terrifyingly numb. It all felt like a strange dream she would wake up from any second. Papa placed a bundle in her arms, and Maman put Eloise's hand in hers. The door opened, and they all stepped out into the night. A thick fog obscured the familiar place with its fountain and houses from view. Aurélie huddled as close to Papa as she could. Fear was beginning to find its way through the numbness, but Papa's calmness was comforting. Maman and Jules were behind her. Together they moved forward slowly, feeling their way through the heavy darkness. A few mysterious orbs of light ahead were all that was visible of the street lamps. Aurélie barely dared to breathe. She prayed she wouldn't trip over the rough cobblestones. She wondered where they were going and if they would ever make it. Every minute seemed like an hour. Only their shuffling, irregular footsteps could be heard, breaking the silence until Papa froze, and Aurélie almost ran into him. She burned to ask a question, but she didn't dare. His head was cocked to the side, listening. He turned round quickly and motioned for them to move sideways off the road. Aurélie, heart in her throat, pulled Eloise after her. A wall suddenly loomed out of the fog. A short distance ahead was a doorway. Papa darted towards it. Aurélie followed. In a moment the family was huddled together, everyone holding their breath. Aurélie's ears were straining. She could hear them. Footsteps, rhythmic, echoing, marching. Aurélie was sure they would hear her heart pounding and catch them. The marching came closer and closer until she was sure they were right on top of them. She peered into the dark fog but could see nothing. Then the footsteps began to recede. Papa motioned to Aurélie to follow. She nodded and swallowed hard. The family hugged the wall of the building and rounded the corner into a side alley. They continued, pausing regularly, as one or other of them heard phantom footsteps behind them. Aurélie's body was tense, weary, and she had a sharp pain between her shoulders. Another wall emerged out of the heavy gloom. Papa studied it for a moment, then nodded to himself. A little further along the wall a door appeared. Papa walked up to it and gave it a quiet knock. Aurélie's heart leapt back into her throat, and she looked behind her. After a few dreadful moments, the door opened a crack. "Mon ami," said a voice from inside in a hoarse whisper. "Le Marquis," replied Papa. The door opened and the family hurried inside. The house was as dark as the street. Once the door was shut and cautiously bolted, a lantern was unveiled. It was held by a young man. He wore a white armband over his coat and a small flute on a string round his neck. He motioned for them to be silent and to follow him. He led them down a hall and through a door leading to a flight of stairs that descended in a spiral. At the bottom of the steps was a small vaulted chamber with a dirt floor. The youth walked to the center of the space and turned to face them. "We had the news an hour ago, and we're expecting you," he said in a low voice. "We can speak presently. For now, follow me." The youth set his lantern down and turned to face the back wall. He took the small flute that hung round his neck and began to play a haunting tune. The music pierced Aurélie's heart. She had never heard it before, and yet it seemed to be written for her. She felt seen, known. All her dreams, hopes, fears, and sorrows were somehow contained in those magical notes. And further, it tugged at her, called and pushed, to a place she had never been, yet knew to be her home. Then Aurélie became aware that the music had stopped. The youth had picked up his lantern. The wall he was facing began to shimmer, vibrate, and then transform. It happened so fast that Aurélie barely had time to be aware that it was happening. An archway grew from the ground and expanded until it filled most of the wall. The stones moved, shrunk, and rearranged themselves to make room for the arch. Carved stonework spread along the edge of the archway, coming together in a sharp point at the center. Above the pinnacle, a curious coat of arms unfurled. Beyond the arch was a wide, almost palatial stone staircase, bordered by lanterns. It was almost blinding after being so long in the dark. The whole family gasped as one. The youth started down the staircase. Aurélie followed him first, pulling Eloise after her. The rest of the family followed. When Papa, who brought up the rear, crossed the threshold onto the stairs, the portal shut, leaving a solid wall.
"We can speak freely now,"
said the youth without looking back.
"None of their spies can hear us now." "Where are you taking us?"
Maman asked.
"To La Fourche."
Aurélie caught her breath and looked up at him, hopefully. He nodded to her, but added,
"There's a long way to go yet."
Aurélie sighed. She could feel Eloise's hand trembling in hers. She didn't know if it was fear or excitement, or both. Aurélie thought it might be best to find a distraction for her.
"Who made this place?"
Aurélie asked as they continued to descend the majestic stairs.
"The Marquis. Not the current Marquis, of course. His great-uncle completed the project, though I believe it was the 7th Marquis that began the work." "Was that his coat of arms I saw?" "It was."
Aurélie's head was bursting with questions.
"Are we safe now?"
Everyone stopped and turned. It was Jules who had spoken. His big eyes looked round at them. Aurélie wanted to hug her little brother. Maman did it for her.
"Yes,"
she said.
"Safer,"
amended the youth.
"Once we get you across the bridge at La Fourche, you will be truly safe. There are still perils ahead, but you are not alone, and we must go on now."
He led them down the stairs to where the walls widened out and the floor spread into a platform. And at the end of the platform, right before them, was the last thing Aurélie expected to see. A steam train. It had a bright green and gold engine coupled to a similarly coloured coal car and 2 passenger cars.
"A train!"
Aurélie cried, almost gleefully.
"Welcome to the underground,"
said the youth with a grin. A woman stepped off the engine and walked towards them. Like the youth, she wore a white armband over her coal-stained coat and a small flute round her neck. The youth shook hands with her and then made introductions.
"This is Madeleine. She'll take you on the next leg of the journey." "You're not coming with us?"
Aurélie asked.
"This is my post,"
he said simply, and started back up the stairs.
"All aboard,"
Madeleine said with a reassuring smile as she opened the door to the first of the cars. Aurélie stepped onto the train and helped Eloise up after her. The train was furnished with several U-shaped sofas, which all opened to an aisle that ran the length of the car. Aurélie threw herself down on the nearest one as a wave of exhaustion swept over her.
"Sleep if you can,"
Madeleine said.
"We have many hours before we reach La Fourche."
Aurélie closed her eyes. In a few moments the train began to move. The rhythmic click-clack and the gentle sway soon melted her worries into a deep sleep. She woke once in the night, thinking she heard marching footsteps. She sat upright. The rest of her family was all asleep on the 2 sofas next to her. All but Papa, who was pacing up and down the aisle, nervously nibbling his fingernails. When he saw her, his hands dropped to his side, and he walked purposefully towards her.
"Are we all right, Papa?"
"Yes, my dear, but it was a near-run thing. Go back to sleep now." Aurélie had lain back down with a crease between her brows, but the train quickly lulled her back to sleep. Her dreams were troubled this time. They were full of running, hiding, narrow escapes, and always, always the sound of marching feet just behind her. She was grateful when the squealing of brakes woke her. She hurried to the window and looked out. She could see nothing but the wall of the tunnel. Pushing the window open and leaning out, she could see a red lantern approaching out of the darkness, and Madeleine climbing down to go towards it. "The tunnel is flooded!" called a deep voice from behind the lantern. The speaker stepped into the light cast by the locomotive's headlamp. He was an old man with a long white beard, wearing a white armband, leaning on what looked like a staff, and holding the red lantern. By this time Papa had opened the door of the train car and stepped down. Aurélie followed. Hearing them, Madeleine turned to make introductions.
"This is Verdun. He's the watchman at the exchange."
Papa and Verdun shook hands.
"What's to be done?"
Papa asked.
"I will take you to an escape tunnel, and then on foot to the exchange,"
said Verdun in a voice that made Aurélie think of St. Nicholas.
"Once we have braved the tunnel, you will continue on your way."
"Could we not wait here?"
asked Aurélie. Verdun smiled at her but shook his head.
"It will be safer at the exchange, my child. Flooded tunnels are very perilous. We must go quickly."
The family gathered their belongings and prepared to follow. Verdun led the way, and Madeleine, abandoning her train for the time being, took up the rear. They had not walked long when a gleaming appeared ahead of them, along with a faint lapping sound.
The floodwaters are still rising,
Verdun said.
There is no time to lose.
Aurélie, her heart in her mouth, hurried forward and found herself on the edge of the water. She hesitated, but Verdun was already wading forward. Taking a deep breath, she splashed in. The water instantly found the hole in her shoe, and the shock made her cry out for an instant. The cold was almost unbearable, but she pushed on. The water kept rising as they went. By the time it was up to her knees, she was trembling. Papa was carrying Jules, and Madeleine was helping Maman. Aurélie knew she had to be brave for Eloise, who was now crying quietly beside her. Still, the water rose. Aurélie was breathing heavily, as cold and fear fought to overtake her. She squeezed Eloise's hand and tried to say something comforting, but her teeth chattered so much that she couldn't speak. The water was round her waist now, and she was holding her bundle over her head to keep it dry, when Verdun changed course and moved to the side of the tunnel. He shone his lantern on the tunnel wall, and Aurélie saw that a stone was sticking out farther than all the rest. On it was carved a coat of arms, the same she had seen above the archway at the start of their journey. Verdun raised his staff to his lips, and Aurélie saw that it was in fact a giant flute. He began to play the same song the youth had played. As before, the music stirred something deep inside Aurélie, and as she listened, a warmth came over her, driving out the cold and giving her fresh strength. At the same time, a small doorway opened just below the coat of arms. Through the doorway, a narrow shaft like that of a well rose toward the surface. A metal ladder was bolted to the side. Verdun, setting the lantern down at the foot of the ladder, began to climb. Aurélie, already feeling the warmth fading and the cold creeping back in, threw herself at the ladder and climbed. It was awkward climbing with the bundle, and the ladder was incredibly cold. She hoped and prayed her hands wouldn't slip. At last she saw stars above her, and she felt Verdun's strong arms lift her out of the shaft and set her on the ground. Aurélie found herself standing next to an old broken well on the edge of a wood and a field. She looked round in bewilderment. She opened her mouth to ask a question, but Verdun pressed a finger to his lips. She had to be content watching Verdun help the rest of her family out of the well. Madeleine came up last, carrying the covered lantern. Verdun then motioned for them all to follow and plunged into the woods. If he were following a trail, Aurélie couldn't make it out. She tried to stay right behind him, but it was difficult. She fell a few times and had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. Then Aurélie thought she heard it. It couldn't just be in her head, because Verdun had stopped. It must be real. It was real, and drawing nearer, the sound of marching feet. Aurélie's heart was pounding just as loudly. The footsteps seemed to echo through the whole wood. She crouched down as low as she could and shut her eyes. It was childish, she knew, but maybe, just maybe, if she couldn't see them, they wouldn't see her. Then, slowly, they began to fade away again until everything was still once more. Aurélie opened her eyes. Verdun was gone, but only for a moment. He reappeared, beckoning to her to follow again. She rose and obeyed. A short distance ahead, lights began to appear through the trees. When they reached the edge of the wood, Aurélie saw they were just outside a town, and that an open archway ahead of them led into a small courtyard behind the nearest house. Verdun led them stealthily through this to a back door, which he unlocked and opened. Aurélie stepped through to find herself in a pantry and the back of a kitchen. The others piled in behind her, and Verdun shut and locked the door.
"Welcome to the exchange,"
Verdun whispered.
"Do not speak loudly or go near the windows. I will show you a room where you can rest, and bring you some food."
Verdun led them up a flight of stairs to a series of connected rooms. There was a pile of blankets on the floor with which they quickly wrapped themselves to get warm. When Aurélie had finally stopped shivering, she began to look about her. She noticed there was a girl about her age who also wore a white armband, standing by the shuttered window in the corner of the room, and she was peeking through a small crack. Aurélie was about to turn to Papa to ask about the girl, when she heard it again, the marching. She fixed her eyes on the window. She was sure they were in the street just below the window, but it kept growing louder, nearer, louder and louder, nearer and nearer. There was no other sound. Aurélie held her breath. They were right outside the house, just on the other side of the wall. It was almost unbearable. Then, all at once, they stopped. Panic was rising and threatening to swallow her. She wanted to scream, but she bit it back.
"Don't be afraid,"
said a comforting voice in her ear. She turned her startled eyes toward the speaker. It was Verdun. He smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder.
They use the house across the street as a headquarters for this area, he continued in whisper.
So they can keep an eye on you?
Aurélie asked in a hoarse whisper. Verdun gave a low chuckle that made her feel safe.
We chose this house to keep an eye on them,
he replied, gesturing towards the girl by the window.
This is the last place they would think of looking.
The girl gave a signal without taking her eye from the crack. Verdun nodded to himself and handed Aurélie a large piece of bread and some cheese from a bag.
They've gone inside now,
he said.
Rest easy, luck is on our side. The tunnel is beginning to drain.
Will it take long?
Maman asked in a whisper.
Difficult to say,
Verdun replied.
Once we've gotten the water out, we'll need to make sure the tunnel isn't damaged before Madeleine can fetch her train.
So the family sat down and ate their food while Verdun went to assist in the work. It took some time, in the end, before he reappeared.
All is well,
he said.
Come with me.
The family quickly did so, and he led them back through the house and down to the cellar. The portal below the coat of arms was already open, and Madeleine was waiting for them. Papa shook hands with Verdun. Madeleine turned and led the way down the grand stairs. Once the portal was closed behind them, Aurélie asked the question that had been growing all night.
All the people with white armbands? Who are they? And why are you helping us?
Madeleine smiled.
We're the ones who still believe in you,
she said.
The ones who still love the old stories, who long for the border to reopen.
Aurélie looked up at her in wonder.
You know who we really are?
Madeleine's eyes twinkled and she glanced down at Aurélie's shoulders. Aurélie's hands moved to unbutton her coat, but Madeleine placed a hand on her arm to stop her.
You shouldn't reveal yourself yet. Even here it might be dangerous,
she said with a distinct note of longing in her voice. Aurélie cast a frightened look behind her and drew her coat tighter. She instinctively moved closer to Madeleine. The grand staircase began to branch off in several different directions. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, Aurélie saw why. Instead of one platform, there were several. It was an entire underground train station where different rail lines converged. Madeleine led Aurélie to the train. When they reached the passenger car, Madeleine stopped and opened the door. Aurélie threw her arms round her.
Thank you,
she whispered.
Let's get you to La Forge,
Madeleine replied. Aurélie nodded and climbed up into the train. She sat down on the nearest sofa. Eloise came and snuggled up close to her. The train slowly pulled away from the platform. Soon the sway of the car became rhythmic as the train rumbled through the underground. Aurélie sat staring at her reflection in the window. Her eyes slowly drifted toward her shoulders. She pulled her coat a little tighter round her. The trance-like calm was broken by a sound like a knock on the roof of the car. Aurélie jumped to her feet, staring at the ceiling. There was another knock, sharper this time, from a different part of the roof.
What was that?
Eloise asked. The train lurched forward a little, throwing Aurélie off balance.
We've picked up speed,
said Papa. More sounds were coming from the roof of the train, some small and light as rain, some loud and deep enough to startle everyone to their feet. Aurélie thought there was another sound too that mixed with what was happening on the roof and the rumbling of the train. Marching. It sounded faint, but as if it were right over their heads and keeping up with the train. Aurélie ran to the window and would have opened it, but a large stone came hurtling down just on the other side of the glass. She gasped.
The tunnel is collapsing!
She cried. Papa ran to the door at the front of the car which linked it to the coal car. He wrenched it open. There was no doubt. The roof of the tunnel was slowly crumbling. Aurélie thought the sound of marching grew louder too.
What's happening?
Papa called across the coal car to the locomotive beyond. There was a pause. Aurélie held her breath.
We've been discovered!
Came Madeleine's voice. It was barely audible over the roar of the train, the din of falling rocks and the marching. Jules began to cry. Aurélie bit her lip. She wanted to join him but knew it would do no good. She stared ahead through the open door, expecting any minute to see the tunnel fully collapse and bury them. Instead, she heard a new sound enter the fray. It was music. Madeleine was playing a flute. For a moment the marching seemed to falter, and the rocks stopped falling. For a moment. The marching became more forceful, and it seemed to Aurélie that the whole tunnel quivered. Madeleine's flute fought back, but the rocks continued to fall, striking the train like hailstones. The song Madeline was playing was, of course, the same song all the people with white armbands played, the song that had found its resonance deep inside Aurélie. Now, in these moments that might be her last, she opened her mouth, and the same song came out. Words she had never heard were springing to her lips as she sang. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Eloise joined in, then Papa. The rocks hung in mid-air, as if suspended on strings, and the train rushed past them. The marching sounded angrier, more frantic. Maman was singing now. Jules was too. The rocks were rising, slowly at first, then more rapidly. They were reattaching themselves to the roof of the tunnel. The marching became disordered, no longer in step. Still they sang. The last of the loose rocks were now rising back to their places. The tunnel was whole again. Still they sang. The sound of confused footsteps died slowly away. Still they sang. They didn't stop until the squeal of brakes told them they had arrived. As the train skidded to a stop, Madeline leapt out onto the station platform.
They may try again,
she said as she hurried to open the door for them.
We should go quickly.
Aurélie, bundle in one hand, Eloise in the other, leapt onto the platform. She had just enough time to notice the coat of arms, the same coat of arms, above the archway before passing through it and up the stairs. Madeline was playing her flute as they climbed. Aurélie started singing again. The others joined. When they reached the top of the stairs, the portal was already open. Madeline paused to hand Papa a lantern.
Wait on there until they fetch you, she ordered. Go now before the portal closes.
Papa nodded and led the way with the lantern into the darkness beyond the arch. Aurélie followed, leading Eloise. As soon as the whole family went through, the archway closed up behind them. Papa cast the light of the lantern round. They were in a cellar from which they could see no doorway nor stairs. It was filled with the strangest assortment of items Aurélie had ever seen. Each object was unique, curious, and obviously very old. It struck her as more of a collection than anything else. But what invisible thread connected one object to the next she couldn't fathom. The family wandered slowly round at first, looking at the artifacts one by one, before finally finding several crates and a barrel to sit on. It wasn't until they had sat for a while that Aurélie's eyes drifted to the walls of the cellar. These were plastered a long time ago, judging by the dirt, cracks, and whatever it was that seemed scrawled all over it. Aurélie rose to get a better view, and she gasped.
Names, she said. They're all names.
Sure enough, the entire wall was covered in names. Sometimes a single name, sometimes a group. Most had dates written under them. Some included where they had come from. There must have been hundreds of them. The whole family was inspecting the wall now. The names filled that whole wall and continued to the next and then the next. Some were written in pencil, some in ink, a few with some kind of paint. At last, on the final wall, they came to the end. Without saying a word, Papa set the lantern down and took a pen from his pocket. He wrote the date and his name on the wall before handing the pen to Maman, who wrote her name just next to his. Aurélie got the pen next and wrote her name underneath Papa's, then gave it to Eloise. Eloise and Jules both wrote their names after Aurélie's. When they were done, they stood close together, staring at their signatures. They were still lost in this meditation when a sound disturbed them. They turned round to see a trapdoor being opened in the ceiling and a ladder being let down. Two small figures, no taller than Eloise, came down. One was a boy holding a lantern. He had messy hair, a big grin, and eyes that sparkled with fun, mischief. The other was a girl who seemed to give off her own light and carried what looked like a staff, but Aurélie rightly guessed to be a flute.
All clear,
said the boy in the almost sing-song kind of way one speaks when playing a fabulous game.
Follow us,
said the girl in the most musical voice Aurélie had ever heard. Aurélie found she was drawn irresistibly forward.
Are you?
She began.
Le Fée de la Forge,
Papa finished in awestruck tones. La Fée smiled.
And this is Le Marquis.
The Marquis grinned as if it were the best joke of all time. He held out a hand to Aurélie. She took it, and he helped her up the ladder. She came up into what looked like a comfortable cottage. Le Fée came up behind her.
I don't know how to thank you,
Aurélie said in an awed whisper. Le Fée smiled at her.
You don't have to. Seeing you safely across the bridge is thanks enough. But you saved us. I hardly did that all by myself. Besides, if you hadn't been so brave, you wouldn't have gotten to where we could help you.
Aurélie shook her head.
I don't feel brave. The brave ones never do.
LeFay replied with a knowing smile. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out something that she pressed into Aurélie's hand. She then ran lightly to the front door and peeked out into the darkness. Aurélie looked down at what was in her hand. It was a white armband. She smiled. By this time, her whole family was out of the cellar, and the Marquis was closing the trap door. He rolled a carpet over it and pulled a table on top of that. "All set," he called to LeFay.
All clear,
she replied. The Marquis joined her at the door, motioning for the family to follow. The Marquis and LeFay led them out the door, and to the right. They found themselves on a hillside in the ruins of a castle gateway. Aurélie looked back. The cottage they had left was, in fact, what was left of one of the guard towers. Beyond it and below, she could see a little village, just visible in the moonlight. They were now walking across the outer courtyard. A lane appeared, flanked on either side by trees, which began to rise toward the summit of the hill. They passed in silence through the ruins of another gate. Two men, wearing white armbands, stood on guard on either side. The Marquis and LeFay greeted them silently as they passed. The path took them up into the inner courtyard of the ruined castle. They turned left just before they reached the remains of a tower, and they found themselves standing on the very summit of the hill, looking over miles of moonlit countryside. Aurélie drank in the view. It was beautiful. After giving them a moment to catch their breath, the Marquis and LeFay led them to the right, where a deep chasm separated them from the forest beyond the castle. The path led right to the edge, and it seemed to Aurélie as if it continued on the other side, cutting straight through the trees. LeFay perched on a pile of rocks and began to play. Aurélie found herself transfixed as she listened. The song was, or shared, a likeness to the song she had heard several times that night, only it was as though they had just been dreams, and this was waking reality. Or as if they had been candles, and now she stood in the glory of a full sunrise. She doubted she had ever really heard music before. Faint echoes at best. This lifted her soul, gave life and courage to her weary heart, and she felt like she could fly. As she listened, before her eyes, something appeared over the chasm. A bridge. Aurélie couldn't decide if it looked like it was made of glass or light itself. It shone brightly, but if she focused her eyes on one place, she could see through it to the other side. Then she caught a glimpse of it, of the country beyond. Tall, white-capped mountains gleamed in the distance. Emerald forests climbed up the slopes, green hills rolled gently before them, wild flowers grew alongside silver streams. Aurélie shouted with joy, and leapt onto the bridge, racing toward that country. Eloise was at her side, Papa and Maman just behind, and Jules was beginning to outpace her. Aurélie threw aside her bundle and ripped her coat off. Her wings, so long concealed, beat the air happily. She gave a leap and was airborne. All of them were flying, coats and bundles forgotten, racing deeper and deeper into fairy. Home at long last.
I hope you enjoyed the story. Like, comment, share, subscribe, hype, do all the things. And click on another video, there should be one around here somewhere.